Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a public workshop on District Rule 4401, Steam Enhanced Crude Oil Production Wells, Rule 4409, Components at Light Crude Oil Production Facilities, Natural Gas Production Facilities, and Natural Gas Processing Facilities, Rule 4623, Storage of Organic Liquids, and Rule 4624, Transfer of Organic Liquid. My name is Jessie Fierro, and I am the Director of Plan and Rule Development here at the San Joaquin Valley Air District, and I am joined by several district staff, including Air Quality Specialist Luis Aguilera Orozco, Senior Air Quality Specialist Michael Corder, and Deputy Air Pollution Control Officer Shiraz Gill. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation via Zoom today. So before I begin, I do want to review some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Only district staff will be available via Zoom. Members of the public will be asked to unmute themselves when they are recognized to make a public comment at the end of the presentation. After the presentation, staff will announce that the public comment period is open. Staff will recognize any public attendee who has indicated they wish to speak. So how do you do that? On your Zoom video application, press raise hand at the bottom of your screen so that you may be recognized to speak. And when we call on you, we'll click a button so you'll be asked to unmute yourself. So do be sure to unmute yourself so we can hear your comments. If you're participating by Zoom phone conference, please press *9 to raise your hand so that you may be recognized to speak. Staff will call the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak. Be sure to press *6 to unmute or mute yourself. You can also submit comments to us via email during the workshop at webcast@valleyair.org. Again, that's webcast@valleyair.org. I will be monitoring this mailbox during the workshop, and comments received will be read out loud by staff during the public comment period. Please note that if you wish to submit comments after the workshop, there will be a different email address provided for that, and you'll see that at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. I will remind you all of these guidelines when it is time for the public comment period. So for now, just remember that that will happen at the end of the presentation, and you'll have a chance to raise your hand and be unmuted for that component of the workshop. So with that, I will now turn it over to Luis Aguilera Orozco to start walking us through the rules that we're talking about today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Want
to do the PowerPoint
presentation?
Naomi is uploading the PowerPoint presentation.
Perfect. Do you want to select down at the bottom and put it in slideshow mode? There you go. Perfect.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Luis Aguilera. Today we'll be talking about potential amendments to District Rules 4401, 4409, 4455, 4653, and 4654. Next slide, please. The San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District has long evaluated and implemented stringent control measures across all sources under its jurisdiction in efforts to attain federal standards. There have been over 650 rules and regulations amended with the intent of controlling emissions with stationary and local sources. The district's new source review permitting regulation requires the use of best available control technology, also known as BACT. District stationary sources are also subject to best available retrofit control technology, also known as BART, since the 1980s. The district's robust and ongoing analysis is necessary to demonstrate that district rules continue to meet state and federal requirements. This is due in part to the increasingly stringent air quality standards as well as advancements to control technologies. Next slide, please. So BART, just to provide a brief detail, is an air emissions limit for existing sources and is a maximum degree of reduction achievable taking into account environmental, energy, and economic impacts. AB 617 has required an expedited implementation schedule for facilities in the California Air Resources Board Cap and Trade program. The district adopted expedited BARC schedule back in December of 2018. And based on those results, the district is proposing more stringent leak detection and repair requirements for sources subject to rules 4401, 4409, 4623, 4624, and 4455. The analysis also found that current control technology requirements in those said rules meet or exceed BARC levels of control, and no further requirements are proposed for control technologies. I will now turn it over to Michael, who will be going to the rule overviews and the proposed changes for the said rules.
I will
Awesome.
jump in real quick to let participants know that you can find copies of these rules and the PowerPoint presentation on the district's workshops webpage.
Awesome. Thank you, Luis. If you can advance to the next slide, please. So I'm going to go over an overview of the 5 rules that are being proposed, and then also what is going to be the proposed changes for those rules. So the first rule here is Rule 4401, which is for our light oil and gas facilities. It was first adopted in April 19th, 1991, and has subsequently been amended 5 times. This rule is to limit the emissions from steam-enhanced crude oil wells. And as for that, the requirements, VOC emissions from wells or tanks with closed vents, it's required to have VOC reduction by 99%. Along with that, there's leak detection and repair program requiring for minimizing leaks for with specific repair thresholds and timelines. There's also a vapor control required for VOC destruction and removal with an efficiency of at least 99%. Along with an operator management plan, describes components subject to the rule and schedules for inspections. And then there's also a record keeping requirement. So with implementation of this rule, VOC emission reductions is reduced by 99%. Next slide, please. For Rule 4409, which I misspoke last time, this is our light oil and gas rule. Sorry about that. This rule was adopted in April 20th, 2005. And the purpose of this rule is to limit VOC from light crude oil production facilities, natural gas production facilities, and natural gas processing facilities. Rule 4409 requires leak detection and repair for minimizing leaks with specific repair thresholds and timelines, and also an operator management plan which describes components subject to the rule and the schedule for their inspections, along with record keeping requirements. And so for this rule, with implementation, your VOC emissions are reduced by 65%. Next slide, please. For Rule 4455, which was adopted April 20th, 2005, this rule controls VOC emissions from leaking components at petroleum refineries, gas liquid processing facilities, and chemical plants. 4455 requires leak detection repair for minimizing leaks with a specific repair threshold and timeline. Also, an operator management plan describing components that are subject to the rule and schedule of inspections, along with record keeping requirements. With implementation of this rule, VOC emissions are reduced by 87%. Next slide, please. For Rule 4623, which was adopted April 11th, 1991, and has been subsequently amended 4 times, this rule limits VOC emissions from storage of organic liquids in tanks with a capacity of 1,100 gallons or greater. 4623 requires the control of organic liquids storage tanks by utilizing pressure vacuum vents, installation of a vapor control system with at least a 95 control efficiency, or the use of a floating roof depending on the tank size and the true vapor pressure of the organic liquid that's being stored. Also, components must be maintained in a leak-free condition. With implementation of this rule, VOC emissions are reduced by up to 95%. Next slide, please. For Rule 4624, which was adopted April 11th, 1991, and then has been subsequently amended 4 times. This rule limits VOC emissions from the transfer of organic liquids. 4624 requires the use of a vapor control system to capture and reduce emissions by at least 95%, and a leak detection and repair program required to minimize leaks with a specific repair threshold and timeline. With the implementation of this rule, VOC emissions are reduced by up to 95%. Next slide, please. For these rules, there can be some vapor control requirements. So for this, I'm going to go over the rules that have them. So for Rule 4623, our organic liquid storage, it has a vapor control requirement of either a pressure vacuum relief valve or an internal floating roof, an external floating roof, or a vapor recovery system with a control efficiency of 95%. For our Rule 4624, which is the transfer of organic liquids, its control requirements require bottom loading, a closed VOC system, control system, a vapor collection and control system for containers, and also a vapor recovery system that meets the requirements of the organic storage tank rule. Along with Rule 4401, our steam enhanced wells, VOC collection and controls required with a 99% VOC destruction and removal. For Rule 4409, which is for our light oil and gas plants, and for Rule 4455, dealing with refineries and gas processing and chemical plants, these rules focus only on the LDAR. And so for those, we don't have a set control requirement that's needed. So the control requirements for these rules were found to meet or exceed BART levels. So at this time, we're not going to be proposing any additional control requirements. Can you advance to the next slide, please? So the effects of oil and gas production operations here in the Valley. So for the district rules that are being discussed, 4401, 4409, 4455, 4623, and 4624, these all apply to oil and gas production facilities. For 4401, the steam enhanced rule, there are currently 48 facilities subject to the rule. For 4409, we have, which is for our light oil and gas facilities, we have 61 facilities. For 4455, which is our components at refineries, gas liquid processing facilities, and chemical plants, there are 17 facilities. For Rule 4623, which is for that storage of organic liquids, there are 335 facilities. And for Rule 4624, transfer of organic liquids, there are 58 facilities. So with that, the VOC emissions from these sources are approximately 4.5 tons per day. And if you kind of look over in the pie chart, you can kind of see that for all of the VOC emissions in the Valley, mobile, stationary, and area sources, 1.5 make up the VOC for the LDAR components. Can you advance to the next slide, please? So now kind of to go on to what's being proposed today. So for the proposed regulatory updates, instead of kind of creating a new leak detection and repair rule as previously proposed in the last workshop, but due to the complexity of combining the requirements And basically the uniqueness of these 5 rules, the district's proposing to amend each individual rule as follows. So there'll be a lower leak threshold for these rules, or could be a requirement for more frequent inspections, and then clarity and definitions for these rules. Next slide, please. So for the proposed amendments for Rule 4401 are steam enhanced wells. We're going to propose to lower the leak threshold from 2,000 parts per million to 500 parts per million for gas leaks. We will maintain the leak threshold for the pressure relief devices since they are currently at 400 parts per million. Change the frequency of inspections from an annual inspection to quarterly inspections. And then establish an extended repair period, up to 30 days for rare instances where a rig up operation is required to complete the repair. This is consistent with state COGR, California Oil and Gas Regulation. And then also update, clarify, and add definitions for consistency across districts' LDAR rules. Next slide, please. For Rule 4409, our light oil and gas facilities, we're proposing to lower the leak threshold from 2,000 parts per million for gas vapor and 1,000 parts per million for liquid service components down to 500 parts per million. And then we would maintain the leak threshold for the pressure relief devices at 200 parts per million. We would maintain the quarterly inspection frequency requirement. And then in rare instances, allow an extended repair period up to 30 days where a rig up operation is required to complete repairs. And this is consistent with the state of California's oil and gas regulation. And then also update, clarify, add definitions for consistencies across other district LDAR rules. Next slide, please. For Rule 4455, our refinery gas plants and chemical plants, we would lower the leak threshold for pumps, compressors, other component types from 1,000 parts per million to 500 parts per million for components in gas and vapor service. We'd maintain the lower leak threshold for other components, which is currently between 100 parts per million to 500 parts per million. And then we'd maintain the quarterly inspection frequency required, but we would remove the option for an annual inspection. We would also update, clarify, add definitions for consistency across other district LDAR rules. Next slide, please. And then for our organic tanks rule 4623, we would lower the leak or establish a leak threshold starting at 500 parts per million, establish an allowable number of leaks for between the 500 parts per million and the current 10,000 parts per million, which would be 5 allowable leaks for 200 components inspected or less, or 10% allowable leaks for more than 200 components inspected at one time. Establish quarterly inspection requirements for fixed roof tanks. We would update the voluntary tank preventive inspection and maintenance tank interior cleaning program to only include floating roof tanks. For fixed roof tanks, we would be required to comply with maintenance and tank cleaning provisions. And then we would update, clarify, and add definitions for consistency across the other district LDAR rules. Next slide, please. I believe this would be our last proposed change rule here, which is for Rule 4624, transfer of organic liquids. So we'd establish a leak threshold of 500 parts per million. We would establish an allowable number of leaks between the 500 parts per million to less than 1,000 parts per million. This would allow 5 allowable leaks for 200 components or less during inspection, or 2% allowable leaks or more or 2% allowable leaks when more than 200 components are checked during an inspection. We would also establish a quarterly inspection requirement for fixed roof tanks, and then update, clarify, add definitions for consistency across other LDAR rules. Next slide, please. So with everything that the district is proposing, we have an estimated VOC emission reduction and cost effectiveness. For our steam enhanced wells, Rule 4401, and for our light oil and gas Rule 4409, we could see an emission reduction of these two combined of greater than 0.2 tons per day, or approximately 75 tons per year. For the emission reductions for Rule 4623, which is for organic tanks, we would see a greater than 0.9 tons per day, almost 1 ton per day reduction, and 347 tons per year. For Rule 4624, which is our transfer of organic liquids, we would see a 0.18 tons per day, or 67 tons per year. And then for Rule 4455, that one is still under evaluation. So with these, the Valley could see a total emission VOC reduction of 1.34 tons per day, or 490 tons per year. With these proposals, the average cost effectiveness for rule compliance is $67,285. Next slide, please. So the proposed compliance dates for what the district is proposing is new LDAR requirements would be in effect starting January 1st, 2024. And then an authority to construct application would be required by January 1st, 2023. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Luis to finish the last portion of the slides.
Thank you, Michael. Can you move over to the next slide, please? So with the public engagement process, we encourage public participation and in comments. After this workshop, we're taking comments in starting today up till March 20th, whether you want to submit them via web or if you'd like to submit written comments, we will have that information in the following slide. We also plan to publish final draft rules no later than March 22nd of this month to give a public comment period for the final draft of these rules so that we can finalize and take them over to the governing board for potential hearings on April 21st of 2022. Next slide, please. Please make your comments or any letters over to Michael Corder with the mailing address as seen on the screen here, phone number available as well, or via email. Also, if you have not enrolled in our listserv, please take the time to jot out the information here so you can be part of the listserv whenever new amendments or any announcements for any oil and gas rules are up for availability. And with that, we'd like to take comments and any questions.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Luis and Michael. So as a reminder, you have a few methods for making your comments. As you saw on the last slide, you can email Michael your comments anytime between now and the public hearing. You can make comments today by either emailing the webcast at valleyair.org. I'll be monitoring that. And as one of you already have, you can also raise your hand. And Noemi, I'm not a co-host, so I'm assuming you're going to help me unmute people. But it looks like we have our first comment from Scott Falkenberg. Noemi, could you please allow Scott to unmute himself and ask his question?
Jesse, I will be doing that part, but yes.
Oh, okay. whoever. Thank you. I
Mr.
just know
Hoffer, you're
I
not
can't.
able to provide public comment.
Scott Scott is still muted.
Oh, you can unmute yourself now. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I was blocked by one of the little tabs. I have a couple of questions. The first one, so if we're getting rid of the voluntary tank inspection program, does that mean we're going to have to get variances every time we clean a tank? Because that's very burdensome. So we'll think about that one. Hatch leaks, are those going to be considered a component?
Hatch leak?
Yes, on a tank under 4623.
I believe that would be considered a component, Michael.
Yes, sir. So hatches are in the new definition, which has the components listed. So yes.
Thank you. And then permitting for this. Right now we have our permits in, I think, 2016 or something went from 1 or 2 pages all the way up to like, some of them are like 15, 16 pages. When we added in all the 4401 and 4409 additional rules, and those are very specific. Are you guys going to do a just a mass permit change and mail out, or are you going to make us submit ATCs for every single one of these permits that will be affected?
That's a good question, Scott. The way we have it formatted in the presentation as a part of our proposal is an ATC would be required by January 1st, 2023.
Okay, that's overly burdensome for a lot of facilities. And just as a note out there. And then we also talked about the ability to issue an NTC versus an NOV on some of this. We are going down to a lower rule, and we haven't heard any feedback on that.
Yes,
And
Scott.
we'll submit comments on that.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
And then,
Go ahead.
So also just to throw this in there, are there going to be any definitions around inspection procedures? We've been asking for inspection procedures since 2018 for both these and the new or the COGR rule, and we haven't seen anything. So we were hoping these would be incorporated in these permits or in the rules, not the permits, the rules. And you guys, nobody there is from the compliance side, but that'd be great if you guys could work with compliance and coordinate that. I mean, it's almost been 4 years since we asked for that. There is a lot of issues around that now based on the interpretation of the rules, the difference from rule development to how it's being implemented in the field. And you took care of my last question. So the OMPs, they're just going to stay the same. We're just going to have a 4401, 4409 OMP.
Right.
Okay. And then that's it for now, Adeline. And I appreciate your working on this rule. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for your comments. We do have one comment that was emailed in, and I'll read that in a moment. But just to remind everyone else, you can raise your hand on the bottom of your screen and you can email your questions. So I will go to our hand raised comment in just a moment, but let me read the comment that was emailed. We have someone asking, is the average cost effectiveness provided on slide 17 in dollars per tons of VOC reduced? Does it mean $67,285 per ton for rule compliance? Thank you for the clarification.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And next we'll go to Trent Rosenlieb.
Thank you. My question was also about the cost at $62,285. If you could again explain what is that based on?
Good question, Trent. Now that cost has a lot of information in it. It includes a cost that industry would incur to go to do potential additional inspections and repair on additional components at the lower leak thresholds. So based on that, we believe that there's additional costs associated with that, and based on the amount of emission reductions that will be achieved with the rule, that cost would be about $67,000 per ton of VOC emissions reduced.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just real quick. So that's initial cost of compliance and to comply with the amended rules as presently proposed. Costs could be ongoing, I'm assuming, depending on the operations.
I'm sorry, Trent, can you repeat that question?
That cost is based to come into compliance with the amended rules as they are
Right.
proposed. Okay.
That's correct.
So ongoing cost, I guess it just depends on the individual operators and their components and so forth, what ongoing costs will be for compliance.
Right. I mean, that cost dollar amount is intended to take into consideration ongoing costs. That's what we believe, that in order to get that amount of reductions, that's what the cost would be for ongoing compliance with the rule.
Okay, very good. Just a brief comment. It's for some of the smaller operators, that could be a very significant cost. I appreciate any opportunities operators might have to work with the district on that.
Right, and that is an average cost. That's a good point that you bring up, Trent. It is an average cost based on all the rules, right? Each particular facility will have different costs, right? Depending on the amount and types of leaks and things of that nature. So it could be lower for one facility, could be a little bit higher for another facility.
All right, very good. Thank you for your question or answers.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Trent. We did receive an email comment seeking clarification on where these materials are posted. They are posted on the district's workshops page, where you probably found the public notice for this workshop. I will tell you, you probably have to refresh your browser. So even if you're just going to that page for the first time in a while, make sure you click the little refresh button, and then the PowerPoint presentation and the draft rules should appear. But I have the same issue. If I don't refresh, I don't see them. So give that a shot. And if anyone is still having trouble finding those, they can email webcast@valier.org, and I can email those materials to you later. Next, we'll go to Juan Campos. Could you please unmute and ask your question?
Good afternoon, everybody. My question was in cost as well. We wanted to see, and maybe they're in the published supporting documentation on some of the factors involved with time that the district used to complete each component, and also the repair and what failure repair rate the district used to quantify the cost benefit analysis. If it's published surveys, did the district perform their own survey, and where did that data come from? So that's, and if it's there on the website, we'll be happy to go look through it, but just wanted to hear the district stance on that.
Thanks, Juan. That's a good question. When we post our draft staff report, or a staff report that should have all the methodology included in that, Michael, I'm not sure if we have the specifics of, I believe we use some information from EPA, and then we use some information from vendors to come up with some sort of an average. We could share that information.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Teresa Buckingham.
Hi there, this is Teresa. So I had two questions. when you guys calculate the reduction potential by implementing the updated rule, is that based on a potential to emit calculation, meaning component counts times an emission factor?
That is correct.
And then my other question slash comment is, oil and gas industry is having to do a number of ATC applications for all the various rule updates. So we have the 4320, the combustion equipment, we're having to submit ATCs this year. And then for this rule, you guys are proposing again that we have to resubmit ATCs again next year. Is there a reason why the rule couldn't be incorporated when the permits come up for renewal versus having to do individual ATCs every time there's a rule update?
That's a very good question, Teresa. That's something that we could take a look at. Now, obviously, there's a whole wide variety of sources. Major sources do go through a renewal process through Title V, and we could take a look at that. There is significant time that goes into updating these types of permits, so we will take a look at that.
Thank you. It's a little cumbersome, having to do new ATC applications for the various sources. And then since we're going to do it this year and go back into it next year, you have a lot of time and effort into putting the applications together as well as the fees. And I'm assuming on the district side, I obviously don't know your resources, but
Right.
I'm sure they're going to get slammed too with all
Right.
these applications coming in.
Right, and it gets a little cumbersome or a little bit more resource intensive when we're dealing with NSR conditions that could have a little bit more stringency compared to the rule requirements. So it's just not as a simple process just to update the permits uniformly, but we'll take that comment into consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Our next commenter is Bruce Falkenhagen.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Nod your head. Okay, thank you. One question I have is that you have a time frame of 30 days if you have to get a rig out to fix a leak or to solve a problem. And very appropriate that you come up with this hearing these weeks. You can't get it. What if you can't get a rig? Right now, there is so much going on that it might be 4 months before we can get a rig because of the high price of oil right now. Everyone is doing everything possible to put everything online. We have other Division of Oil and Gas requirements for well testing and things like that. What happens if I physically can't get a rig to our lease in 30 days? What are you going to do?
Bruce, that's a good comment. Keep in mind that the current rule only allows 2 days for that type of change. So we're trying to be consistent with what COGR, the state regulation, requires, and they limit it up to 30 days. So we're trying to be consistent with the state requirement there. Now, yeah.
Okay. Checking the email one more time, and I'm not seeing any comments there. Last chance. Oh, Julie Means, please go ahead. Julie, I believe you're unmuted, but we can't hear you yet. Now you're muted. Now you're unmuted. We cannot hear you. Still nothing from Julie. All right, Julie, I'm not sure what's happening, but we will go on and go to the next commenter and we can circle back to you for another shot in a moment. You can also, and anyone can email their comments to webcast@valyair.org and I will read them aloud. Let's go on and go to Christine Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Hi, I'm Christine Luther Zimmerman with the Western States Petroleum Association. We just wanted to say that while the increase in cost of compliance for these rules was a significant increase from around $500 a ton to as high as the 62 number that was quoted earlier that's in the slides, and it is quite costly. These are important emission reductions. These are well thought out rules, a lot of economic analysis and consideration went into them. And while deploying equipment to do repairs right now is very challenging and problematic, WISPA wants to acknowledge the change from 2 days to 30 days. So these are painful and they are difficult. However, we see their necessity and we appreciate the good work that went into development of these draft rules. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Taking one last look to see if there is anyone else who would like to make a comment. And I'm also checking the email. After this workshop, you can email Michael Corridor at the email address provided on the PowerPoint slide. I am seeing another comment from Teresa Buckingham.
Hi there, one more question. And I'm sure we'll probably see this in the draft, but in regards to the limit for being issued an instant notice of violation, have any of those limits changed or we're just changing the actual leak ppm?
That is correct, Teresa. We're only changing the leak ppm to 500 ppm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We do have a comment emailed in from Julie Means. So I'm sorry you were having technical difficulties, but I did get your email. So I will go on and read her comment. Tanks will be held to 500 ppm and after 5 leaks, each leak will result in a violation after 5, regardless of bolted or welded.
I believe there is no distinguishing factor in the rule as it is proposed.
Okay. Thank you, Julie, for your comments. I'm checking one last time to see if there's any additional comments before we close the workshop. And seeing none, we will go on and conclude. Thank you again for attending today, and thank you to everyone who provided comments. Please keep emailing Michael as you have other questions or comments. And you can find the proposed rules and the PowerPoint presentation on our workshops page. That concludes today's workshop. Thank you.
Thank you.